Good afternoon. This is the Curriculum Subcommittee of the Brookline School Committee, and today is October 29th, 2024. Yep. So welcome. We are doing some presentations on our MCAS results from last spring. And before we do that, we are going to approve the minutes if we get the vote. So I would like to move the minutes from September 18th. So joint meeting of the Finance Subcommittee. Do I have a second? Thank you, Jesse. Jesse, how do you vote?
Yes.
Stephen, how do you vote?
Yes.
And I vote yes as well. And Helen is absent today, so. Okay, so we're going to just start in on the MCAS presentation. Jody Fortuna is going to start us off. And then we're going to go to the special ed report, and then we're going to go to the English language learning report. Either. So, Jody, you want me to turn it over to you?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So, so what we're going to do, I think, is we are going to hear one presentation, then open it up for questions, and we'll hear another presentation, open up for questions, and we'll hear the third presentation, open up for questions, all in an hour and a half.
Yes.
Just setting standards and expectations. Not sure we'll get there, but we'll do our best. Okay. Jody.
Thank you, Suzanne. So I wanted to open tonight with some really good news about how our Brookline schools are doing. We receive accountability ratings from the state every year. And this year, the accountability percentiles for Brookline range from the 87th percentile to the 97th percentile, which means that we're outperforming 97% of our schools, of the schools in Massachusetts with that administer similar tests. So that's really good news, and it provides some context for what we're talking about today. One of the things that, as far as setting expectations, we're not going to be talking about individual schools today. We're going to be talking about the district as a whole. And as Suzanne said, I have some wonderful colleagues here who are going to speak to their areas of expertise. And we're going to start. So, in the English language arts, 70% of our students are meeting or exceeding expectations. This is down from 3%. I'm
sorry, Jody.
Yeah.
Before we start, I'm just confused. The agenda, Suzanne, for the meeting just shows MCAS. Was there a change?
No, this is MCAS, Stephen.
I think you mentioned 3 presentations.
Oh, but they're all about MCAS, Stephen. I'm sorry.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. I thought you were saying that there were presentations on other topics as well.
That was my fault.
I'm sorry, Jody.
So we're going to have general MCAS results, then we're going to have special ed MCAS results, and then we're going to have English learner MCAS results.
Got it.
Okay, thanks. Sorry.
So 70% of our students are meeting or exceeding expectations in ELA. This is down 3% from the previous year. However, it is 28% above the state average. So again, that is good news. Our average scale score, remember, a passing score on the MCAS for meeting expectations is 500. Our average scale score is 512. This is down 1 from the previous year. The state really isn't focusing on where it's just 1%. They say it could be something to watch, but it's not really statistically significant. And we're 17% higher than the state average there. One of the things that I'm very proud of with our MCAS testing is our student growth percentiles. So student growth percentiles measure like students and the amount of growth that they make each year. And this is where we can really start to see the impact of our wonderful teachers on students. And in a high-performing district, it often is very difficult to get scores for the standard growth percentile that are in what's considered the high range. So 40 to 60 is considered the average range. You'll see here that in our aggregate, our student growth percentile is 58.8%. That 58.8%, we're almost to 60 there, and that's up 1.4 versus the previous year. And it's 8.8 over the state average. Of course, the state average would be 50.
Oh, that is, it's a 0 to 100, is that it? Or something?
It's, yes.
Oh, it does.
And that's a normed score across all the schools in the state, so every year 50 will be the average.
At all schools, meaning K through 12 or high school or what?
It's grades 3 through 8.
Oh, three.
Some freshmen who are taking the test in 10th grade.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So if we look here, we'll see how we're doing at each grade level when compared to the state average. We are exceeding the state average in all grade levels. If I can call your attention to our grade 6 scores and our grade 8 scores, our students are doing very well in ELA in those grade levels, and are outpacing the state by a significant amount there.
And 10th grade as well.
Yes. So this chart, I want to do a couple of things with, which is going to be a little difficult and to follow along with me. I actually might stand up to do this. So here we have the PSB students that are meeting and exceeding expectations, and here we have the state. What you can do, though it's not a direct apples to apples cohort comparison because we have mobility in our district, so it's not exactly the same. If you read on the diagonal, so in 3rd grade, 60% of our students were meeting or exceeding ELA expectations. In 4th grade, that number jumps to 65%. In 4th grade, in 2023, our students that were 4th graders, 66% were meeting expectations. In 2024, that jumped to 70%. In 5th grade, it was 69%. That jumped to 72%. And then 71% to 75%. And then we stayed steady at our 8th grade cohort. The differences that you see here are the differences between 2023 and 2024 at that grade level. So in grade 3, what I'm assuming and my hypothesis is all that great early literacy work that we're doing is starting to pay off. And you'll see that we've increased by our greatest amount of difference here, and where we increased by 10 points. So early indicators for what we're doing with structured literacy seems to be that it's working. Oh, thank you, Betsy.
I guess it's not great.
Oh,
So
that's okay. I'll keep
okay,
pointing.
sorry.
And then if you look at student growth percentiles, this is where I get really excited. We don't have student growth percentiles for students in 3rd grade because our students in 3rd grade are taking their first test. So we can't look at what their growth was from test to test. But if we look here, when they were in 4th grade, the student growth percentile was 46.7. That jumped to 62.3, which is out of that average range and into that high growth range. Our 5th grade fell a little bit from 57.7 to when they were in 6th grade, 56.7. By a point, it's something, again, directionality, but not something to be overly concerned about yet. Look at our 6th graders, though. They went from 56.2% up to 71.5 for a growth percentile. That is really tremendous work and shows the great work that our teachers are doing to prepare students to have that amount of growth. And then from 7th to 8th, we dropped a little bit, but in my opinion, the 8th grade test is actually the hardest of the MCAS tests. So we see a little bit of a drop there. And then in 10th grade, we have solid average growth, a little bit down from the 10th grade the year before. And then in grades 3 through 8, we have 60.3% growth, which is again right on that cusp, but we are moving and making progress.
How,
Go ahead.
yeah, going back to that slide for a second, how would this look if you added in 22, 21, 2019 or something, so that, I mean, looking at just one year versus the next is a very, very difficult to call it a trend
Yes.
for any of them, because, you know, if you don't know what happened the year before.
Statistically, you're right.
Yeah, so I'm
Yes.
just wondering how this would look, or do you have it?
I don't have it. I can
Not
get back
quite this
to
bad,
you.
but I'm saying
Yeah.
it would be more powerful if we look back 5 years, 5 years or something, and then said, okay, now, it's climbing or something like that. Because-
And we definitely have that data, so I
Yeah,
can
I
get
think
that.
it, yeah, it would be helpful. Thank you.
Now, I said I wasn't going to talk about individual schools, and this is the only slide where you'll see individual schools. And there's another one for math. But I wanted to highlight the growth that our students are making. Our students are making a tremendous amount of growth in the aggregate. So you'll see here in Baker in grade 7, 75.5 growth percentile on average. That is incredibly strong growth. And so I just highlighted for you all of the areas in all of our schools where our student growth is above average, which is really exciting to see that in that many places. This is where the story gets, for me, a little bit more interesting. As we look at our data, we are a very diverse community. And if we look at our data by race and income levels, we start to see a story unfold a little bit here. And what we're seeing is that our students that are not low income, our students that don't qualify as low income, are outpacing our students that do qualify as low income when it comes to exceeding expectations. Where that gap narrows a little bit, and it's not a good gap narrowing, is for our Black students. With our Black students, income isn't as much of a deciding factor in whether they meet or exceed expectations. Our average scaled scores. Now remember, 500 is the score for meeting expectations. You can see that we're getting, as the district, we're getting close to our low income students meeting that, but not quite. We're not quite there yet. So we have some work to do there. And our not low income students are far outpacing our low income students there. You can see where the greatest discrepancy is for our Hispanic students. So that's an area of inquiry for us about why that's happening. What are some of the protective factors that we can put in place for our low income Hispanic students so that this doesn't happen for them. What we're seeing, though, is trajectories for the average student growth percentile that are much closer together. There's still a discrepancy there, but the discrepancy isn't as great as it is for meeting and exceeding expectations or the average scaled score. So it's interesting to just think about this and ponder a little bit. And this is all aligned with our strategic plan, right? Much of our strategic plan is formed around this story because this story has been true for us for a couple of years.
I'm going to say a word about why it is that the low income has stronger growth than not. I mean, I know.
It's for Black students.
Well, it's actually true.
Asian, white, for all of them.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's interesting. And I asked myself that question and I don't have a definitive answer to it. But my theory is that we have a lot of protective factors for our students. We have Steps to Success, we have Metco, we have things that I think are working for students that when they're in school and are school dependent to be able to get that growth percentile. I think a lot of the forward thinking things and partnerships that the town supports allows that to happen. But I don't, oh, and Gabe, please jump in.
I would just also argue that some of these differences are quite small.
I was just gonna say.
Yes.
Right, so like for the white students, it's 1 point in
Yes.
student
Right,
growth.
that's very small.
For Asian students, it's 2, you know. For the Black students, it's 4.5 or so.
Yeah.
These are not huge differences.
Right, right.
No, but they're on the cost.
I don't know if you guys can see me.
Yep.
So I'm
Yeah.
typing in. I just have a statistics question. The district differentials, it's 35 points in exceeding expectations and 20 points in average scaled score. But only Hispanic students exceed that. Hispanic students are only like 12%, if I recall, of the student population. So I don't understand how that could be, especially with the average scaled score where it's only 24 points different. And white students, which is half of the student population, is 16 points. How could the district, I just don't understand how that works statistically. How can you have a 20-point differential in average scaled score when everything is beneath it except for Hispanic students? How does that work?
Oh,
I'm not sure I understand. You understand
Yeah,
what
I think
students
it-
asking?
It's average.
so, yeah, first of all, it's average
It's average,
score,
right, it's not top and bottom.
but our students who experience poverty or low income are more heavily represented with our Black and Hispanic students. And so like we don't have the end sizes here of how many students we're talking about in each
I
group,
see.
but the
I
number,
see.
like,
You explained it. You explained it,
it's
Gabe.
about
Thank you.
50% white, right?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Great question, Stephen.
No, that was a great answer. Sorry, I didn't figure that out.
So that was ELA. Now we're going to go through the same exercise with math. It's just easier to stand. You'll see that 73% of our students met or exceeded expectations. That is not a change from the previous year. That's what we were during the 2023 testing. But it's 31% higher than the state average, which is good to know. Our average scaled score is 513, which is above that cut score of 500 for meeting expectations. Again, that remains very flat from the year before, and it's 18 points above the state average. And then our average student growth percentile, we're edging closer to that 60. It's 59. It's up 2.2 percentage points from the previous year and 9 points from the state average. Here's how our students are doing by grade level. What I take away from this slide is that our 10th grade math program is working for our students. What's happening for them in 9th and 10th grade is really working. But you'll also see this steady incline. And what I think that is about 5 years ago, we adopted a new math curriculum. And I think we're starting to see the fruits of that math curriculum pay off in the middle school where we use Desmos. And I think that's why we're starting to see that. And we're still seeing a good amount above the state average with our investigations at grades 3, 4, and 5. So that's an exciting development. All right. Here's the chart again. And Jesse, I'll get you the additional data.
Thank you.
Here the story is a little bit different. In 3rd grade going to 4th grade, in 2023, 64% of our students met or exceeded expectations. In 2024, that dropped to 56. So it's not all in the positive direction as it was in ELA. 63 to 66, that's a nice jump. 69 to 74, slight drop. 70 to 69, 73 to 77. So, and then our 3 to 8 is down a little bit. Last year, our average was 70% of our students meeting and exceeding, and this year it's 68%. Student growth percentiles, again, we're seeing some strong growth percentiles in grade 6, grade 7, and grades 3 through 8. The rest are solidly in the average range, moving to the strong growth range.
I guess I just have an observation on this one.
Mhm.
This one and the one on ELA, we're looking at compared to the state. Is there any why? In other words, if the state is just doing, say, average work, and PSB wants to be way ahead of it, wouldn't it be better for us to prepare ourselves to say, I don't know, how do we sit amongst the top 3 districts in the state at 300 odd districts? PSB versus, I don't know, big 3 towns, you know.
That's a great suggestion.
Acton, Sturbridge, and who knows, Lunenburg, and they're all better, and then here's where we are, so we know where we are relative to that, because the state to me, with 300 districts, what does it mean? I mean, we know we're gonna, assuming always we're gonna be a little higher than, or
Well,
super high relative to.
it's interesting because we're not gonna see that in our presentation, but for our Black students, we actually underperform the state average, which
Okay.
is data that I can share with you. So I do think the state average is important.
Mhm.
And for next year's presentation, we can definitely take that into account, comparing us to.
And what about that accountability number? What,
That accountability number actually compares us to the other districts,
to all districts?
to all districts. And so, only 3% of the districts in the state are outperforming us and, in the MCAS. So I think that might even reinforce
That's a
your
good,
point,
that's
yeah.
a good.
And I think something that's also really important to watch is how quickly we grow versus the other districts. So if our growth percentiles continue to go up, it means our influence on our students is really much stronger. Whereas if we don't see that rate of growth in other districts, it helps us
Right. that's-
gauge. So I think
Helps it.
that's, yeah, so I think it is really important to keep the other districts in mind. Yeah.
I just want to call out our grade 7 growth scores and our grade 8 growth scores. I've been teaching since ed reform went into place, since MCAS has started. I have been teaching since the standard growth percentile was put in place. It was put in place after the MCAS. I've never seen a grade level with an 84.8% growth percentile. That is outstanding and should be celebrated, as should all of these. But something magical that we are studying was happening in the Lawrence 7th grade math classes last year. And I know what Vanessa would tell us, but that's where this data, school by school, really helps inform the work of our office, which is why we're not getting into the weeds of school by school. But I just had to call that out and celebrate that.
Does something like this happen sort of every year somewhere, or is this just really a all by itself kind of?
It's a really all by itself kind of thing.
Really?
Yeah.
In the 80s, level of mid-80s.
Yeah.
So is it just probability that there's a strong cohort in that grade?
Well,
Grade?
no, not necessarily, because the achievement isn't necessarily as high. It's really, the growth is really our impact on what we're doing with students.
Yeah.
The growth score is based on the same students and students who scored similarly over the last 2 prior years.
Over 2%.
So like these 7th graders are compared to students who scored similarly in 5th grade and then similarly in 6th grade. And so they're outperforming those cohorts of students they're compared to. So it's a kind of funky measure, but it's 2 years of running data. It is comparison to other students. So they're outperforming folks they were scoring similarly to in 5th and 6th grade.
And here again is our comparisons by income and race, and you can see the story that it tells here. Again, is to Stephen's point earlier, our N for Hispanic students is relatively small. However, there is a gap there that persists across ELA and mathematics. What's really exciting though is we see that trend reversed when it comes to average student growth percentiles. So our non-low income students had a 53% student growth percentile, whereas our low income Hispanic students, that increases to 58.9%. So there's a nice increase there. So this gives you kind of an overview, a balcony view of where we are in the aggregate. So any questions on this before we turn it over to Robin and Anna to talk about our students with disabilities?
Yeah, I have a question.
Mhm.
I mean, I apologize for asking so many questions now, but this only came this morning.
Yep.
And I really didn't have a chance to read the day till now to look at it. So it's like first time, so, when do you cut off, the effect of COVID? People being back to school, is it 2 years before now? Like late 21,
Yeah.
22?
Yeah, and I think we're still seeing the effects of COVID in lots of ways, and I think the state is still seeing that.
So I'm
as
thinking,
well.
maybe this from 5th to 7th recognizes the uptick in students being back at school for a year or two.
Absolutely,
Rather than
but
being at home or something like that, so it may not be due to, they were held back and now they're up, so it's, how do you measure, like, was it instructional or was it just being here? That's-
3 years worth of data.
You're right.
yeah.
Yeah, so it'd be.
Yeah, and I really do believe that it is instructional. You don't, that an 84.2 or 84.4, I forget what it was. You don't, that doesn't happen by accident. And it's also very unusual to see a growth percentile that high in a high performing district.
Right.
Which we are.
Stephen?
Well, Carolyn and Stephen both have their
Oh, I
hands.
can't see.
Carolyn first.
Okay, Carolyn, you go first, then Stephen.
Thanks. Hi, it's Carolyn Thal from school committee. Jody, thank you so much for this. Must be a tremendous amount of work to pull together, and this is really clear and really interesting. I loved your framing of really good news, outperforming 90% of schools in Massachusetts that administer MCAS. I loved your charts with the growth percentiles and looking at them on the diagonal. That's super helpful. I would love to ask, and forgive me for not being familiar enough yet, on that metric, growth percentile, is that metric part of our strategic plan? And if so, what is our benchmark or our goal on that metric with MCAS?
Carolyn, I don't have it memorized, but it's part of
You
it.
don't.
And I meant to grab the strategic plan too, to bring in.
Okay.
It is in our strategic plan.
Okay.
Because it is such an important metric about our impact on what's happening with students.
And then forgive me because, okay, thank you. And we can chew on all of this more, I'm sure, going forward. And I think I had one more question. So I want to make sure I fully understand this slide that's still up and the same one on the ELA. Because of course we really want to know how we are doing with our most vulnerable students, vulnerability in different ways. So I'm gonna take Asian just because it's there. So the red is Asian students who are also low income.
Correct.
And the blue is Asian students who are not low income.
Correct.
Separately.
Yes.
And so, and then you were talking about Hispanic. So with, I guess, Hispanic and Black, especially when you separate those out, the ends are pretty small
Yes.
but we still want to be looking at this. And then, so I don't know how to do the statistics on this, but when you look at this for the math and the ELA, does income turn out to be your predictor, your strongest predictor? Does that?
I don't know if it's our strongest predictor. It is it is something that we can reliably say that, as far as average scaled score and exceeding expectations goes, income is a leading factor in determining how students will perform on this test.
Okay. Okay, awesome. Thank you.
Gabe?
I think notably to kind of reinforce Jody's point that it's not the only factor, we can see that our Black students who are not low income underperform white students and Asian students who are low income. Okay, so income alone is not the only predictor.
Okay, and thank you. So that's where, like, I want to look at just the red. Like, so I want to go down the line looking at just the red district, Black, Hispanic, Asian, white. Okay, got it. That's super helpful. And thank you.
Stephen?
Thanks. I just wanted to second Jesse's request for more longitudinal grade data, because I think it would be really interesting to know if growth regularly happen or doesn't happen at a particular level, because I think it would have curricular implications for us. That's it. Thanks.
Okay, thanks, Stephen. Jesse?
Yeah, I mean, from a statistics background, I have a question here. The average here is being calculated just as the mean value, like take everything divided by the number and get an average, okay? So what would be very helpful to see, and it's available, I mean, just by getting all the data, is what the shape of the distribution of all the data look like that the average is coming from. And the reason I say that is you could have the exact same average by looking at just a bell curve, right? You could also have a triple bell curve, like the camel with 3 humps, and your average would be exactly the same. But the two different plots would tell you two different stories about how people are doing. So quoting average everywhere doesn't tell us anything about the spread, like maybe it's like nothing, it goes all the way up and then comes back down, and the average is smack there. Or maybe it's, you know, one of these things that goes way out like that, and still the average is the middle. So there's no indication of what the spread is or distribution, so we don't, it's hard to understand what it means. That's I guess what I'm saying. So anytime we're showing the average, it'd be good to throw in one slide that says, oh, okay, well, here's the distribution of all their data, and you know, here's our averages. That gives us an idea of, are there lumps or valleys somewhere else, or big peaks, or is it all like this way?
Yeah.
Right, and your average is somewhere else. The average might to be the highest. So just
We can
as
definitely do
a
that.
suggestion for visibility, and it helps other people look at it, sort of place the data in a context. That
So
was-
the state provides you with all this.
Open Architects
Yeah, we-
does, so
Oh, okay.
be able to do it.
So
via
the
that.
data are available.
Yeah.
And in both ELA and math, the white students of lower income outperform, well, they were about the same as Gabe pointed out, but slightly ahead. So do we have a narrative to go with that? So I think the math one here is like 60-58. And this one again was a little higher, 61-59 or 61-60. So is there some?
I
Is
think
there-
it's
is there-
how we're focusing our interventions for students. And I think we know that income is a predictive factor. And so we're focusing some interventions, tier 1 interventions there.
Carolyn, Carolyn, you have your hand up?
Yeah, thank you. And I think this kind of just going off from what Jody just said, and it might be too much to sort of get into now, but I would love to understand how this data, this MCAS data, or is this MCAS data used to identify who is underperforming or underachieving, who we need to be reaching, and sort of if so, how. And maybe you don't have to answer that now, but I'm definitely thinking about this that way.
I can definitely answer that now.
Okay.
I'm actually more comfortable talking about that than statistical distribution.
Awesome, me too.
We do identify our students that fall into these categories. We share that with the building principals. And last year we had 2 very successful cases at Pierce and at Lawrence, where the principals really came up with a targeted intervention plan. The principals didn't. The principals tasked the teachers who are closest to the work with coming up with a targeted intervention plan for those students. And sometimes it was something just like creating more of a sense of belonging or more of a sense of ownership in the classroom. But the results that those students had, we reviewed those individually this year, and we're completing the same cycle again, and actually replicating it in more schools because those 2 schools had such success with what they did.
Okay, that's great. Thank you so much. So it is, we are using it as a tool, and it's useful in that way. And
Yeah.
obviously the intervention is what really matters, but it's good to know that there is some usefulness. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
And of course, it's a piece of data on a
Yeah.
student, so you have to look at the classroom work, you have to look at the accommodations they may need. So it is a piece, but it's not the whole picture.
Right.
I just want to point that
And
out.
I thank you for bringing that up, Suzanne, because I'm gonna get on my soapbox for a minute. We never want this to be the sole measure by which we identify a student. This is a snapshot of a student during one day, one moment in time when they were taking the test. They could have had strep throat, they could have, who knows what could have happened. They could have had a fight with their mother, that morning, and their performance isn't that good. So we are continuously gathering both anecdotal data and
And all the student work.
and student work.
And the assessments the teachers. do.
Yes,
Because again, this was from last
last
April, March.
March. ELA was March.
Yeah, so,
yeah,
again,
that's
we've
nice.
almost gone 6 months since then,
Mhm.
and things may or may not have changed for a particular student. So anyway, it's a piece, in my mind, it's a piece of the,
It's a snapshot.
It is a snapshot.
Oh, yeah, it's a snapshot in time, that's all.
Okay,
Any other questions?
I just like to spend, not now, but in my mind, I'm still spending time on just the low income versus the not low income. And our not low income students not doing as well as other not low income students.
Mhm.
So again, it's just a piece of the picture, it's not the whole thing. It also could be some test
Mhm.
bias a little bit. There's many pieces to it, and so
It's a complex
I'm gonna
puzzle.
think about it.
To your point though, how does that maybe even tie in with outside of school tutoring? Because if you're not low income, you have the resources to go to Ocean School.
Right.
And I know there's a huge cohort, having spoken to the people who run Ocean School. At one point, I just ran into them, literally, not literally, get the idea. Just in another context, and they said it personally, so if you have resources, then you should anticipate that story, right? That it's with,
So I just wondered what
Families.
the story and the narrative could be, and I think
Yeah.
there's not one answer, there's many, but I think it's
right,
worth keeping an open mind about that, and so anyway, that's just.
Well, you can
2 cents.
start here, but as you watch what we collect through the year, the story changes, especially for a lot of students who, like Jody said, get those interventions or other supports. And so, like, this is the foundation of what you look at, but lots of that changes.
Okay, we
Thank
going
you.
to Robin next?
We're going to.
Just real quickly, did you say that you were gonna cover the topic of race-based disparities regionally? They're comparing it to neighboring districts. I thought I heard you say that, Jody.
Oh, yes. I didn't ask about neighboring, Steve, and I said that maybe we should compare against,
No, I thought I heard Jody make a comment about how we perform poorly compared to neighboring districts on
No.
So we said
The,
the other
what
way.
you- is, yeah, the state, we underperform the state compared to other Black students.
Oh,
and-
yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
On the state average.
Compare the state average.
right. I didn't catch whether you had said that we were going to discuss that further or not.
No, not today.
Okay,
I
thanks.
think they said they could provide that information.
Mhm.
Okay, we're going to go to special ed. Is that okay?
Yes,
Judy?
no, this is different than the order that's in your packet,
Yeah.
because of Lisa's unexpected illness. The packet is set up with our yellow
We should
and our
Keep
former
going,
yellow
go back
students.
towards the, you're right here, I'm right here, but you. So is it trans trans with IEP, oh, here.
Yeah. It's what's after, in your packet. Of course,
It is at the back.
Okay, so I'm Robin
Yeah.
Fabiano, I'm the Director of Secondary Special Education, and Anna Bauer McTeague is online. And I'm going to be introducing the data and then speaking towards ELA, and she'll be speaking towards them. Okay, so we're happy to walk the committee through like broad brushstrokes of MCAS data for students on IEPs. And as a review, as Jody shared, the accountability percentiles between, oh, it's on there right now. 1 in 99 reported for most schools that administer similar assessments. And so the number is an indication of a school's overall performance relative to other schools that serve similar grades, and then calculated using multiple years of data for all accountability indicators. And then the students categorized as high needs include students with IEPs as well as EL students, and maybe we'll talk about that, and low income. So it's all three of those populations. So you can probably.
Do we know what our high needs population is for the district?
If I didn't have my computer sharing right now, I could tell you.
I'm just curious.
So
Yeah.
In terms of the English language arts data, on the lower left-hand side, you'll see the student growth percentile. And you'll see that the 52.5 is the moderate range. So we're above 5.2 versus last year, and we're above 2.5, the state average. And it's important to note that students on IEPs are compared to at the state level of all students, not students on IEPs. So you'll notice that they're really comparing apples to oranges, and that's important to recognize.
So these are the IEP students who take the test.
Mm-hmm.
There are a small number perhaps who have the alternative forms that they can turn in. Or
So the-
notebooks or whatever.
This is the portfolio. So the state expectation is less than 1% of the district. I
Okay.
think we're a little above that at the high school, and I know that is because we have such a large number of students that are in district programs versus out of district programs. And so we've worked very hard with student IEP teams to, make individual decisions. And the state actually has a flow chart that helps us determine first with certain criteria of who is eligible for the portfolio versus sitting for the standard test with accommodation.
Wait, question here. I'm sorry. In what way are we comparing apples and oranges? Are we just saying that the sample size is too small for it to be generalizable? Or are we saying that they're, or are we saying something different? I'm sorry.
So I'm saying that the scores for students on IEPs are being compared to the state level, including all students. So not just students on IEPs.
So the state average is all students?
Yes.
All
Yes.
students.
Thank you. Do
So
we have a state average for students on IEPs?
not that
I'm aware of.
Okay,
So you'll see that 33% of students on IEPs are meeting or exceeding expectations. And you can see that that's below last year's comparison. And then you'll see the average skill score as well. However, if you were to compare that with the, this, well, I was gonna say, the state average, right, it's below 11%.
So your -2%, Robin, is a percent, not units.
Correct,
So it's basically it's basically no difference.
correct.
When you say, 2% of 33 is 0.6, so I
Right.
mean, so it's basically flat.
Essentially, right, yep. And I would say, again, you're looking at students, the state average is for students with and without
Yeah, oh.
IEPs,
Right, so.
right?
Yeah.
That's why, of course.
Right. Okay. And then the next slide just shows that another way in comparing the grades, and you'll see that the turquoise box are the public schools of Brookline data of meeting or exceeding expectations, and then the black line is the state average. And again, that state average is students with and without IEPs.
Far from our average, though.
Correct. That's true.
Is Anna there?
Anna is here. Are you able to hear me?
Yes, go right ahead.
Well, just as Robin showed you with the ELA scores, we also have math scores for students with IEPs. And again, looking down at the lower left corner, you can see the student growth percentage, well, 53.9. And remembering that 41 to 60 is described as moderate as a growth pattern. For Brookline, when we look at the middle graph, as compared like with the ELA slide, you see that the middle graph looks a little less flat with a slightly less upward tick. So our math scores for students with disabilities, or the growth percentiles, have kind of stayed kind of consistent. And that's something we can be looking into. Again, it's important to note that these are the scores for students with IEPs being compared to the state to include all students in the state, not just kids with IEPs. So where you see on the slide that 34% of the students are meeting or exceeding, that -8 against the state means that 43% of all students in the state met or exceeded expectations, not 42% of students with IEPs. So, just for context, 13% of students with IEPs in the state met or exceeded expectation on the math MCAS. If we move to the third graph on the next slide, we can see this shows the percentage of students with IEPs who met or exceeded the expectations by grade. The state average bar includes all kids in the state, not just students with IEPs. In math, the state average for 2024 was 13. And Brookline students with IEPs exceeded the state average with 33%. And just for context, Lexington was 35 and Newton was 28 on that measure. This is our last slide, and we believe there is absolutely work that needs to continue. And from our lens, a special education lens, the curriculum decisions that are being made right now in ELA and math, as well as the tiered supports, the MTSS work we're engaging with, are meant to support all students and will absolutely help address the outcomes that we're looking for. I think some of those growth scores that were so lovely to see are in some ways related to the intervention that's going into place and the thinking that all the curriculum teams and all their supporters are putting into place. Teachers are doing a great job too, providing that kind of information. And that is it for our students with IEPs.
Thank you. Could you just remind me, what percent of our student body has IEPs? Is it like 19, something like that?
I think the state average is 17, and I think we're above that. I think we're closer to 20, maybe even 21.
Yeah, I think that my last look was a little over 20%. And it varies school to school depending on whether they have district programs or
Right,
not.
that I get, Dana, thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, what did you say, Kate?
18.7 according to our
18.7?
state data, yeah. And the state is 20.
Pretty close at 19. And but the state is 17,
20.2.
20.2, yeah. Oh. So we're really right there in terms of, I would guess, in terms of identifying. Looking at these things. Okay, any other questions or thoughts on this? Or let's move on to English learners. Thank you, Anne. Thank you, Rob.
Thank you very much.
Okay,
Thank
then
you, Anna, Robin. Yes, you have your other meeting.
Well, thank you.
So I am going to share information about two different populations of students. Our current English learners, or English learners when they took the 2024 MCAS test, and also our former English learners. We are responsible for monitoring the progress of former English learners for 4 years. So those students still fall under our English language education program here in terms of accountability and their performance.
Would you mind just defining those? Like, a former is someone who makes it to level 5 or 6.
They have exited our program. Their levels may vary, but they
Okay.
have met the state's exit criteria based on the access for ELL's score that they received. So they were in our program here or in another state or district and no longer receive direct English language instruction. I did think it would be useful to just share some participation requirements because this is such a unique population of students. The MCAS participation requirements does differ for them. And so we do want our English learners to participate in all of the MCAS testing for their grades, regardless of what type of program they're in. So Brookline here offers a sheltered English immersion program. Those students would participate in MCAS. But there are a couple of caveats to that. So English learners, regardless of what level of English they have, they could be a level 1 brand new speaker of English, or they could be a much more advanced speaker of English at a level 5 or level 6, must take math MCAS. They could arrive on Monday and test it on Tuesday. They must take math MCAS. That is not necessarily true for the ELA MCAS. So students who are in their first year of US schools, the ELA MCAS test is optional. Once they have completed a year in US schools, it is no longer optional. They must take the ELA MCAS test. And then the MCAS is available for English learners as well, those who have significant cognitive disabilities. And we don't have any of that data because the number of students is under 10, so the state does not report that in the aggregate. And so the data that I have provided is slightly different than what special education and the overview that Jody provided. I have prepared here data that actually compares our students, some longitudinal data, but also to state data for English learners. So we're actually comparing English learners from Brookline compared to English learners at the state. And so there's a lot of information in each of these charts, but I'm just going to point out a few of them. So here you'll be able to see that in 2024, we had 195 English learners in grades 3 through 8 take the ELA MCAS test. Of those 195, 15% scored either meeting or exceeding expectations, compared to 4% at the state level. And you can see the trend over the years where we have been and continue to make progress. And there is some variability in that data. The next slide will actually show this information as a bar graph so that you can see it more visually appealing here. But you can see we had a little bit of a dip from 2023 to 2024 in terms of our ELA. And I think it's really important to mention at this point how transient our population is. So while I find it very useful to look at this longitudinal data, we are not comparing the same cohorts of students. So Brookline has the highest transiency rate in the state in terms of our English learners. The average length of stay here is 2 years. And so when we look at year-to-year data, it's important to note that the demographics of the students are not the same. We're not looking at the same demographic. In this slide here, you'll see that I'm comparing how our English learners in grades 3 through 8 did compared to non-English learners. So as I mentioned, 15%, looking at 2024, 15% of our English learners scored meeting or exceeding on the MCAS, compared to 71% of non-English learners. Now, non-English learners are students who have never been in the English learner program, have never been identified as requiring additional English language support. So 15% for English learners compared to 71% for non-English learners looking at 2024. You can do that same calculation for the other years as well. This is not a surprise, right? Because for many of our students, English is in progress of being developed, and the MCAS test is not a test that is designed for English learners. It is not measuring their progress on English language proficiency. It is much more content specific. It does not take into account the English factor of our students. I will say, in case it's important to note, that our English learners are allowed to use word-to-word bilingual resources on any of the MCAS tests, which does provide some level of assistance to them.
So I mean, going back to that for a second, so there's nothing surprising about the
Exactly.
difference, right? It's just
That's what I would expect.
mirroring reality
That's right.
for them.
That's right. I hope it helps
Students, I
keep
mean,
us
them, I
there.
didn't mean to.
Right. But I hope
Not
it helps
disparage.
keep us at that level of reality, right?
Right.
Because unfortunately, our students have to take this test, but it's not a test designed for them.
They're not.
Many of them are not yet prepared. They're not yet ready for
Yeah,
it.
of course. Yeah, it makes a lot of sense.
You still do the, used to be access.
We do.
You still do,
That's the test that
So-
we use
to know the English.
prominently, right, to inform many of our educational decisions.
Sorry, what was
That's
that one?
required by-
Susan?
Access,
Oh, access?
they usually give it in January, do they still?
That's right.
It takes like a month to. I'm
Mhm.
just saying.
It takes 6 weeks to get through that test. So that is a criterion reference test that does measure English proficiency. That is the test designed for.
So that tends to give them their level, Jesse, that's how we can identify what level the EL is. It's 1 through 6.
But MCAS doesn't. MCAS, you just take it.
No, they
one
don't,
more.
they don't even know what.
Right.
So here we have our data for former English learners. So these are students who have exited our program within the last 4 years. They may be 1 year removed from our program, or they may be 4 years removed from our program. Well, we must monitor their progress 4 years after exiting our program. And you can see here that 62% of our former English learners, grades 3 through 8 on the ELA MCAS, reached that meeting or exceeding, which that is really phenomenal data. And that is compared to 33% of the state's former English learners. So we are exiting students at a time when they are much better prepared to be able to participate fully in this test to demonstrate their learning.
So if you look across that slide though, we were, oh, sorry, yeah, that, so the district's going from what, like 71 to 67 to 63 to 62, so slowly
But the
doing something
number,
or not?
the number of students is different. I think that needs to be
Okay,
considered. So in 2024, we had the highest compared to all 4 years.
now you have more students.
That's right. So
Well,
higher
so the
numbers.
students are, the N is going up each year.
that's right. And then here's that same data just represented in the bar graph for us to be able to see. And, just to point out, I had shared earlier that our English learners, only 15% of our English learners reach that meeting or exceeding. And now we have our 62% of former English learners. So within the entire sort of population that we are responsible for, we're looking at somewhere around 77% of our students are meeting or exceeding expectations.
That's amazing.
Pretty good. And now we'll move to grade 10. So here we have the data for our tenth grade students, and I did decide to separate this, not put the aggregate data for grades 3 through 10 that take the test. And I did this because the data looks quite different for grade 10 in both ELA and math. So for ELA, we don't have data for 21 and 23 because the N size was too small. We didn't have enough students to be able to do that. But if you look at just 24, again, 20% of our students scored in the meeting expectations. We did not have any students score in the exceeding expectations level. And our 20% is compared to the state's 3%. Here's that same data, just with a different visual representation.
So that 27% in 2024 that did not meet expectations of 2010. We technically have 2 more years to. That's correct.
Yeah.
Correct.
And because that whole N size is 50 kids.
Yeah.
How many?
One
Students,
kid, one or
three
two,
students.
yeah.
3?
Two or
Oh, of that 27% is 2 or 3?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Now, what's interesting though about our 10th grade students is that many of those students are the same. That cohort is very similar to the 2022. More than 75% of those students were the same that took that test in 2022 compared to 2024. And I think it is worth noting that we increased, 20% of our students did end up getting into that meeting expectations category. So there was progress made there for that single cohort, most of that single cohort student.
Going back to that other slide, is there any easy explanation for why it jumped by like 1,500 more students to over at the state level? It's like 4,000 up to 5,500. That's
Yeah.
And it continues to grow.
okay.
yes.
This immigration into the state.
Well, we had,
That's right.
that was
That's-
pandemic.
It's also
21.
where restrictions start to ease.
Right,
Post-pandemic
people were able to
restrictions ease.
return.
Right,
So like 2017, 2018 numbers pre-pandemic might look,
up at that level.
it might be, I know we've had this experience
Even
Oh, you
in
have, okay.
Brookline, our
Like it
numbers,
dropped
huge jump between.
during the pandemic and it's now
Oh,
back up.
Right,
Okay.
Is there not a moratorium on CAS or something during the pandemic?
yes.
Yes,
Yeah.
that's why the data actually goes back to 2021.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
21 was a partial exam, right?
Correct.
21 was a partial exam, and at the high school level, it was also a new exam. So there's a whole bunch of things that were happening.
And here we have, there we go. Yep, our comparison just to English learners compared to non-English learners. And again, this should be no surprise. This is very much expected. 20% of our students who met or exceeded expectations compared to 80% of non-English learners. And then we have our former English learners. So these again, students who did receive English language support. And for our grade 10 for ELA, you'll see we have 62% of our former English learners met or exceeded expectations compared to 39% at the state. Our former English learners are very well positioned to do quite well on this test. Okay.
Are their data ahead of non-English learners?
So for,
Saying they're well positioned, are they better positioned even than
so
native
62%, native speakers are 80% reach meeting or exceeding,
Okay.
and former English learners 62%.
Oh, 62. Oh, I saw you. Okay, here's your
62%. But again, this is for the ELA test.
Yeah.
Now wait till we see math.
Well, fine with that, is not mistake.
Anyway,
Yeah.
Yeah, so here we have our math data now. Let's begin with grades 3 through 8. And you'll be able to see here that 50% of our students in grades 3 through 8, their achievement level was at the meet or exceeding expectations, compared to 10% state level. And if you look at that across the years, that data did go up from 23 to 24. From 22 to 23, we did have a little bit of a dip. And again, this is a test that students must take regardless of what their level of English is, regardless of how much schooling they've had in the US.
If they've been here a week.
That's right. And although it is a math test, it is actually quite heavy still with language in it. So. To know there. And here's just a visual bar graph to see the differentiation from year to year in terms of how our students have performed. Here's the comparison of English learners to non-English learners. Now, this one is much closer, where 50% of our English learners reached meet or exceeding compared to 73% of our non-English learners. So we have a 23% differential of students who have never needed English language support compared to our students who were actively receiving English language. And then our former English learners. So here we can see that 76% of our former English learners are in the meet or exceeding category, and that's compared to 37% at the state level. So again, 76% for our former English learners.
Your growth is
Very, very good there.
It's at 64.
Yeah.
That's pretty good.
And if we look at our former English learners. Here we go into the grade 10 for our English learners. 73% of our English learners were at the meet or exceeding level. Now, what's really fascinating about this, I mean, again, our numbers are small, we have 15 students, but that's compared to 5% at the state. So 73% of Brookline's grade 10 students compared to 5% at the state level.
I mean, it's possible some of those come in even at the middle school or high school.
For our 10th grade cohort, that does typically last a little bit longer than the 3 through 8.
Yeah. And they have probably had, some of them have had strong math in their native language.
Absolutely.
And as a reminder, it's only 13% would be considered passive, which is very few students.
From a graduation standpoint.
From a graduation standpoint.
Yeah.
the
So they
grade.
still have 2
Just,
graders.
yeah.
Partially meeting
It
half
counts.
the for
Yeah.
graduation.
Mhm.
It's only 1 or 2.
Exact, that's what I'm
It's very-
saying, like, it's a very small number.
And here we are just looking at our ELs versus our non-ELs. Here the numbers are much closer. So 73% of ELs meet or exceeding compared to 79% of non-ELs. So we are almost at par with our non-English learners in terms of their performance in the math.
And they, again, they can use the dictionaries.
They can, only word-to-word dictionaries, there are no definitions, that's important too.
Oh, okay.
Only
that's
as useful
better.
as that can be, right?
Right.
Do we give them the dictionaries? Is it online? It's online?
So
We
it should
get,
be
if we get in paper.
Paper.
So there's always a
They
question
put it
like, do you
yours.
have this many
Yeah.
Ukrainian dictionaries, this many
I was gonna say you have.
We move them around. the
Japanese dictionary, Korean
Yeah.
dictionary, yeah.
And we provide that for both our English learners and our former English learners who would like to have that resource.
So the former get it as well.
They are eligible for those as well, if they want to. And
Is that
every.
everybody new? It's like,
No, where's the question?
Is that,
the new.
no, that's, yeah.
And we try to give every student at least 2 resources to use. One would be a dictionary that is the word-to-word.
Yeah.
Dictionary, and the other one is a content vocabulary guide, which is also word-to-word, but those are content-specific technical terms by subject area. So we do that too.
So in math, you're seeing 73, 79, right? I think that's what you shared.
That's right,
Yep.
73% English learners, 79% non-English learners.
Which is basically the same, sort of close.
It's very close.
Total, but on the English, but on the 3 to 8 for math, it was big difference, right?
A
50 and
bigger
70,
difference,
big,
50 to 73, I believe.
which is like a large, like 50%. Interesting.
Well, it's, I don't think that's so surprising, really, Jesse. Math is kind of considered universal language.
Right.
Right, so if you know math, you know math. Well, the
But in the younger grade.
On the
none
newer
of the-
scene, you may know.
Yes, but the
That's the
story,
language
the story
associated
knowledge,
with it,
Right, so the problems, like the word problems may be much
Right,
more
that-
difficult, but the
but the reading is all about
equations.
in
But I think-
comprehension.
Interesting.
Part of the point that Mindy made is our younger students are in district for a fairly short period of time.
Yeah.
Whereas the students who are older tend to have been here
Hands down.
longer, right? So it's not the same kind of student experience. Like,
And the other data point that might be important is the majority of students, like about 85% of our students in grades K through 5 are all at levels like 1 through like level 3.
Yeah.
Proficiency.
English proficiency. That number goes down as we go through the grades. Our upper grade students are coming to us with a bit more English. Okay, and then our former English learners. Here we have 82% of our former English learners reach the meet or exceeding level, and that's compared to 34% of the state. But Jody, if you go, skip to 2. It's not there. We don't have it there. But that's compared to 79% of our non-English learners. Oh, that's because it was the previous slide. So former English learners are scoring 82% of our former English learners compared to 79% of our non-English learners reaching that meet or exceed. So our former English learners are outperforming our non-English learners in grade 10 math, which I think is really phenomenal. It speaks to a lot of the work that we've been doing around content support for our students in preparation to make sure that they can receive their expert diploma.
Do these also get, I guess, I don't know, it's a very small group, it's subdivided by income? Do you have the same issue with, not, low income and non-low income students?
I don't think the end would be large enough to
Not large enough.
reward.
Yeah. Look at the-
To disaggregate that, it would be much, smaller.
It's just be small,
Yeah.
20 students. So.
Yeah.
Okay.
And we have about just under 3% of our population English learners are duly identified as students with disabilities. I anticipate that number will be slightly higher this year. Just a small percentage of our population that's duly identified.
That's what you would expect. I mean, that's a different conversation. I get something
Again,
on
I would
another
expect it.
conversation.
Yeah, just because the length of time that the majority of our students are here, sometimes we just give them a little bit more time to acquire some English before we can really distinguish between a language difference or language disability.
Yeah.
So,
And depending on country of origin, they may not come in with any sort of diagnosis.
Right.
So then there's like a lag.
So you discover what's going on.
They
There's
may
no-
exit our system before.
There's no particular reason why that number would be 3% of a given population versus 19%. Well, I mean, all things being equal, I guess, I don't know.
I mean, it may be worth unpacking a little bit.
I'm not sure, I'm just,
Interesting question.
it's just curiosity. Okay, thank you. Wow, we did a great job. You gave us a lot of information, just to remind anyone that might be watching that this is recorded, so if you want to go back and review some of what we just said. Are there any other questions from, school committee people?
I just want to thank the presenters for another really clear, data-rich presentation. These have really been great.
Thank you, Stephen. And I guess we just want to say too that the strategic plan is just completely wrapped up in all this.
Correct.
Right, and so,
And some of our news is so good that we'll have to adjust our targets in our strategic plan because we read them already.
it's a nice problem.
It is a nice problem to have.
It's good. Okay.
I have a question, if that's all right.
Sure.
I'm really curious to know if there are any, there's so many ways you can like cut and disaggregate the data around MCAS. When you were coming up, and I feel like in the curriculum subcommittee, we get the special privilege of the deep dive. Were there any topics that you were considering putting into this presentation that you left out that were close to being the presentation, or that if we wanted to, look a little bit more into MCAS on our own, or if we had dashboard access, we might poke around and find interesting?
They're all smiling. I'm not sure what that means.
No, there's so much information. We're really getting to the point where we're very data rich, and the deciding factors for tonight were what's the district story that is happening with the district, and what can we talk about as far as curriculum and interventions and things that go along with that? But you know, clearly the longitudinal data is there, the shape of the data that Dr. Hector was referring to is also something that can be provided and we can look at. I could spend hours and days and weeks just diving into the dashboards for this.
You might also say that DESI has all its information online and you can compare any district or any school within the state. You could just spend hours doing that, but
Yes.
Yeah, but not in the way that Panorama lets you display it. So in such a easily visualized way. I'm wondering, is there a way for us to get, I can't tell if you're rolling your eyes, so that's good for me. Is there a way that we could get dashboard access to play around with MCAS data? I would just love to be able to see some of the longitudinal data myself and just see what I could learn for myself. Or would you-
We can, yeah, we can do what we did with the M class and, because your M class should also still be populating. We probably can do a redacted dashboard that will allow you to do some of that. Actually,
That would-
and it provides, like Jesse asked for the scatter plots, it will do that too for you.
That would be,
Or not
great.
scatter plots, but the
Just the
distribution.
distribution
Mhm.
view.
I'll do that for you.
I feel like that would make all of our nerdy hearts very happy.
So you're.
I need a little time,
Yeah.
get it running.
But this is all coming from the DESI website,
No, well,
ultimately.
it's from the
Yeah.
state data, it's from our state data, yes.
There's a level of detail we get that is not public, but like we have
Correct.
individual students and their actual written responses up to Essence, right?
Yeah.
We have access to that.
But to generate these plots, you don't have to have their individual responses, right? So that is DESI data.
Mhm. Yeah, it's what's reported through this.
And then it goes into some system called Panorama, which you guys have.
Open
have.
Open architecture,
Open Architects is your view into the data.
yes,
To generate these plots and
Yes.
tables.
Yeah.
So
and it allows us to compare cohorts, different groups, it allows us to cut and dice it in a way that the DESI reports are static. These would not.
does DESI have the income, non-low income, and race-based information? Has all that as
Yeah.
well?
there's a
Well,
lot
what
of
you-
information.
What you can't do is anytime that there's like some intersection of dual identifications. you
Right,
cannot
we
gather
can't do that there.
So I, for example, would love to have the EL data that's specific to English learners who are also low income.
Right.
Or English learners who also have an IEP, or English learners by race, or English learners by, gender. That part you cannot segregate.
I see, from there.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Carolyn?
Thanks. And I'll echo the others. Thanks for this. This was super clear and really useful. And I was really interested in all of it. So what I'm saying is not remotely critical or corrective. I think I'm hearing too from other school committee members. I would love to hear, I don't know if this then also comes to full school committee, but I'll really appreciate ongoing information from you guys, from our experts, about how this is useful for you, how it's useful for teachers, how you're using it to identify interventions that you want to do, and the connection to the strategic plan, and including if it means that there's some revision, right? We don't want to have a solution looking for a problem. So I'm super interested. I love the good news and I want to keep hearing the good news. And I'm also interested in how it's useful. So just thanks for all of it. And that's it.
Okay, well, thank you, everybody. Only thing left is, says old and new business.
I don't know if we want to talk about the November meeting. We can't meet on the 19th.
Oh,
And
Right.
Stephen, Jesse, I don't know if Monday, the 25th works. Of November, this is.
That town meeting?
The 19th is.
Our meeting was to have been at 4 o'clock on the 19th, but that date no longer works. So just think about that. and Let me know.
That works for me, the 25th.
Okay, great. Thank you, Stephen.
Yeah, that's, what day?
The 19th at
Monday.
4, you're saying?
The 19th at 4 no longer works.
It doesn't work.
It does
Oh,
not
'cause
work.
That's the data. Okay,
No,
that doesn't work. for other
changing
reasons.
it now.
Yes.
What about the 25th for?
Just the next Monday. You can let me know, but just throw it
Apparently,
out.
sure. Yeah,
Okay,
that'll
great.
work.
We're looking good, Benson.
So let me,
I don't know about Ellen.
know,
Yeah.
Yeah, and I'll
She'll
send it,
out.
I'll update the
you
calendar.
were saying, oh, you're gonna, so that's gonna be the date until?
Yeah, because we've got the three
Yeah,
and
three
we
to
do-
Oh,
We've got
okay.
a quorum.
All right.
Yeah.
So it'll populate that.
it'll populate, yes.
Okay.
Another email from me, just what you want.
As long as it auto populates the calendar, then I just wrote that. So
Okay,
that's what,
we
11:25.
did 5 minutes early, 6 minutes.
Yeah, just one comment.
Oh,
Okay, just one comment in terms of the new business is that I think I mentioned it during the presentation as well. But it would be great if we had this information the day before or the night before the day before, because between 8:30 when it came to the box. And now
Yeah,
it's not
I-
happening. So then I'm looking at it for the first time and I'm like, what,
Yeah.
you know, it's hard to get your head around.
That's an ask.
We
Lot of
tried,
information.
yeah, we
Yeah, I
tried to do
understand.
that.
I know.
There were some extenuating circumstances this week.
Yeah, that's a good point.
That's
Okay.
it.
I know.
It's like some kind of new normal.
Okay,
So,
thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Well, have a good evening. I will see most of us tomorrow.
Yeah, that's true.